So I wanted to do a video that's a little bit different to some of the other fight discussions or fighter discussion pieces that we do on the channel. I wanted to talk about the timing of fights and when a fight should take place and when it is most commercially viable for a fight to take place. Now, it certainly is the case that on rare occasions, delaying a fight and postponing it and making the fans wait and wait and wait can increase the value of the fight. The obvious example for that is Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. You know, fans were pining for that fight 5-6 years ago. But the truth is, had that fight happened back in 2010, 2011, etc., neither of the guys involved in the fight would have most likely made anything like the amount of money they did in 2015. It was just a different game back then. The fighters' profiles were on different levels, and the fight was as big as it could have been financially and commercially in 2015. Having said that, it's my belief that that's actually a rarity. I wanted to do this video today. The news broke, and it's on Boxing Scene at present, that James Degale would still consider the George Groves fight, following on from the George Groves loss to Badu Jack, but Degale would only be worth consider proceeding if it were to be based on a 90-10 split. On a related note, I also just watched an extended interview that IFL TV did today with Eddie Hearn, where he talked about the potential splits in a Carl Frampton and Scott Quigg fight, and also some conversation potentially regarding Kell Brook and Amir Khan. So I wanted to talk about this. In my opinion, what makes a fight most valuable? Well, clearly it's interest from the public, but in terms of generating that interest, what makes a fight most valuable is things that are out of our control. I mean, if we look at the biggest UK boxing match of the last 10-15 years, it's got to be George Groves versus Carl Froch 2 in terms of its commercial value. And let's not forget that when George Groves 1 versus Carl Froch was announced, it wasn't actually a much lauded fight. People were complaining that it was on pay-per-view. It was viewed as too much too soon for George Groves. I think Carl Froch was certainly a quite heavy favourite. And then it was only the events of that fight, how George Groves dramatically dropped Carl in round 1, how George Groves took a huge lead on the points, how there was the controversial stoppage. That's what built Groves versus Froch 2 in such a massive event. Had Howard Foster not stepped in early, let the fight gone on for another 30 seconds, and Froch had flattened George Groves, which may well have happened, George Groves 2 would have never been as big a fight. The reason it was such a big fight was because of the controversy, the talk outside of the ring, the accusations that the referee had stopped it so early. What I'm getting at is, it wasn't the fight in itself that turned it into such a mega event, or the two fighters. It was actually the stuff that was outside of everyone's control, how the first fight had ended, the hype that surrounded that, the public reaction, etc. Now, in terms of making fights of that level again in the UK, I think it will be hard to match without similar controversy. Because let's be honest, controversy breeds discussion. It breeds huge features on ringside. It views people like myself and much more established YouTube channels doing hours and hours of footage and videos discussing the fights and the whys for wherefore. But I believe that those sort of occasions are few and far between, and as I say, out of our control. So I'm about to do a chat to say that I think fighters should take the big fights when they're available. But before I do, I'm just giving the caveat that there are two rare types of examples where it is worth delaying. Firstly is the Carl Froch George Groves example. Secondly is the Floyd Mayweather Manny Pacquiao example. Having said that, in my opinion, 8 times out of 10, if a big fight is put in front of a fighter, that fighter would be mad not to take it. Let's look at James Degale versus George Groves. That fight was available at Wembley Stadium this year. I think Eddie Hearn was looking at a 50-50 split for that fight. But George Groves said no. He said he was after 70%. He ignored the fact that Eddie Hearn could bring Sky pay-per-view to the event. He ignored the fact that the sort of promotional value of having Sky and having that build-up and having the promoter who organised Froxgroves last year at Wembley added immense value. And instead, he went down the mandatory challenger route, fighting Badu Jack. Now, I don't know what George Groves earned when he fought Badu Jack on an undercard, but my guess is that that would have probably been less than $1 million. Certainly less than $2 million. I would say he probably got paid between $500,000 and $1.5 million. Had he fought James Degale at Wembley on Sky Sports pay-per-view, which it doubtlessly would have been, surely he'd have been looking at a payday at least 3 or 4 times that. Instead, Groves gambled, he rolled the dice, and he thought that the fight, like Mayweather-Pacquiao, could get bigger with time and could lead to more money and more commercial appeal down the road even. I think that was a massive, massive, massive mistake. Groves has now fought for the world title 3 times and lost 3 times. He's had 3 losses on his record in the last 5 fights. It's going to be very, very hard for him to demand a split with James Degale going forward. Another example is Carl Frampton and Scott Quigg. And I think this is a key example, because in my mind, both Frampton and Quigg are very, very beatable fighters. I actually think Frampton is the superior fighter, but I thought he looked very poor last time out. And based on that performance, he's a beatable fighter. Scott Quigg certainly looked excellent against Kiko Martinez. I couldn't fault him. What I can say, however, is this is the same guy who dropped a draw to Salinas relatively recently and has looked one-paced at times. My point is, if they start fighting big names, I know Carl Frampton's got some sort of tricky mandatory. Scott Quigg's moving into a high-profile matchup with Donaire, potentially. It's not impossible that these guys could lose. If Scott Quigg takes a loss, how does that affect Carl Frampton? Where is Carl Frampton ever going to be able to get the payday from Scott Quigg? If Frampton fought Guillermo Rigondeaux, if Frampton fought Leo Santa Cruz, Abner Mares, he's not going to get the payday that Scott Quigg can provide. It's the same with George Groves. He went and fought for a world title. If George Groves fought the best in his division, Andre Ward, or even if he fought, Arthur Abraham, Badu Jack again, he's not going to get the same payday as when he fought, as if he would have fought James Degale, because the domestic interest, selling a pay-per-view in your country, selling out your country's national stadium, is far more relevant than fighting abroad, fighting a world champion, winning a belt, becoming #1 in the division. I'm talking from a commercial sense here. Amir Khan, Kell Brook is a further example. Sorely, the Kell Brook is actually a more financially viable matchup for Amir Khan than Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao or Juan Manuel Marquez. Khan should be thinking. I think Khan's kind of got the attitude at present that it doesn't really matter if he takes a loss, because his profile will be so big having lost to Mayweather, he can still get a 50-50 split against Kell Brook. And I think potentially he's right. But in having that opinion, he's maybe putting too much faith in Kell Brook, because Kell Brook looks like he's going towards the Tim Bradley matchup early next year. And you've got to ask yourself, Amir Khan may at first find it funny if Tim Bradley beats Kell Brook, but in hindsight, hasn't Khan just blown £5-6 million that he could have had? My point is, it's all well and good for these fighters holding out for the fight to get bigger, holding out for their opponent to fight a bigger name. Everyone's trying to model themselves at present on Mayweather-Pacquiao. Those guys delayed and they made hundreds of millions of pounds out of that delay. But I'd say that 8 times out of 10, potentially 9 times out of 10, you've got to take the money when it's in front of you. Not only might you lose, but more importantly, your opponent might lose. Who remembers when Tyson Fury versus David Price was a multi-million-pound event? Nowadays, David Price would be lucky to get a fight against Derek Chisora. Profiles go up, profiles go down. But these guys, Frampton, Quigg especially, with 2 guys in big fights who have the potential to lose, they're gambling a lot of money. And I think we should look at what happened with George Groves. Look at how he was asking for 70-30 when he could have taken 50-50. And remember that James Degale will now fight him on a 90-10 basis, as the news broke today. It's a long-winded video. it doesn't have a particular message, but I think these fighters really have to take note of the situation with George Groves. And guys like Frampton and Quigg, if they genuinely want to fight, look at George Groves, look at David Price, and realise that fighting is a dangerous, risky game. You might not have the greatest lifespan as a top fighter. If the opportunity's there, grasp it with both hands. Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this video, please give me the thumbs up. Thanks for watching.